Hello, CBC parents. Hope you are doing well. Pastor Mario here just to give you a 5-minute conversation starter with your youth in correlation with what we have been talking about in youth group. And so this past Sunday, we have just finished this arc in Genesis, Genesis chapter 9, of Noah's story with the ark, and then at the end of his life, we talked about the end of his life in Genesis chapter 9. And this was a very great teaching, piggybacking off of the teachings that Jackson and Dawson gave weeks prior, that being 7 and chapter 8. About the beginning and the middle of Noah's life, of him being called to build this crazy ark, and the middle of him doing it in the ark, and some of the thoughts that they both drew out of that. Things like God is consistent, things like God is loving towards us, even in the midst of our sin, and even in the midst of him doing this justice on the earth of causing this flood and dealing with sin. And so coming out of that and speaking in chapter 9 about the end of Noah's life, where in the beginning of chapter 9, Noah builds an ark for the Lord in response to him sparing his life and giving him this new cultural mandate to multiply on the earth and to cultivate it and to subdue it and fill it. And then we enter into something very interesting, this contrasted part in verses 20 through 23, where we see that Noah now begins to enter into sin and become a drunk. And he spends the last of his days being a father who is kind of shameful and drinking his life away. And this is how Noah ends his life. And what we drew from that is this idea of the danger of a comfortable life. And we talked about two main things, that comfort makes us vulnerable to sin, and comfort makes us lazy in our purposes of God. And this is just two realities that we run into when we are comfortable. Comfort isn't a sin. It's not bad to build a comfortable life, but it does lead to these temptations. We become more vulnerable to sin, and maybe we'll become lazy in our purposes to God. And so how can you engage with your youth this week in regards to these things? Well, I have some questions that maybe you can ask your student, or maybe you can kind of read the passage together again. I would encourage you to read it again, maybe before bedtime, or maybe after dinner, or whatever your home life looks like. Maybe read chapter 9 again, and maybe if you have your own questions that maybe come as the Lord puts on your heart in having conversation with your student, but read it again. Read it again, talk about it honestly, because we come to this passage and we come to this sobering reality that, I think sometimes we put comfort over the things that God is asking us to do. And sometimes we get really comfortable with the life that we've made for ourselves. And we get very comfortable with the way that we do things. And we become very comfortable with the routines of life that we often forget about the things that God has called us to do. So be honest with your student. Be honest with your student. Encourage them to be honest. But how can you gear them towards the grace of Jesus in this? How could we realize the reality that maybe our comfortable lives have kind of geared us away from some of the things that God has called us to, and how can we then shift and see and walk in the grace that God has given to us in Christ? And so here's some questions that maybe you can use in your conversation time. The first thing is, what do you think contributed to Noah's lifestyle at the end of his life? Comfort is a big one, but maybe there was some other things in the text that maybe you notice that maybe seemed to contribute to his vulnerability to the sin that he was in. Another one would be, how does this passage actually encourage you? That would be a good question for a student, because it would cause them to think, okay, well, there seems to not really be so much good stuff going on at the end of Noah's life. How does that encourage me? Well, a good way to kind of find that encouragement is to realize that we are on this side of the cross, that whenever we slip up and we fall into these things, or maybe we realize that we've kind of fallen into the comfortable lifestyles of the world, and we've forgotten kind of maybe the mission of God, which is to go out and make disciples of all nations, and wherever you work and play and go to school, there's grace in Christ. And encouraging your student to look at the grace of Christ and look at the identity that they have in Christ as a follower of Jesus, as a son and a daughter of Jesus, that they are bought and they have grace in Christ, that it's never too late to kind of bring your life back into alignment with what God is purposing for your life. I think that would be a great maybe conversation to have kind of with that question. And again, I encourage you to pray with your student. Maybe after reading and talking about stuff, maybe just spend maybe 2, 3, maybe 5 minutes just praying for them and praying with them in regards to this. And so I hope that this conversation starter leads to some great conversations for you guys. Again, these are going to be weekly. So every Monday, we're going to be sending out a conversation starter for you with the goal that you would engage with your student with what they are already learning at CBC Youth. And so I pray that you guys are benefited by this. I pray that multiple beautiful conversations happen in the home. And so thank you guys very much. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, mario@discovercommunity.org. Thank you guys for watching. Have a blessed day. Hello, parents. This is Pastor Mario. Thank you guys for joining us for this week's conversation starter. If you want more ways that you can engage with your youth, you could check out the other conversation starters here on my side. Thank you guys for joining us. Hope you guys are doing well.